The title of the lesson is Do Not Be Conformed to This World. It should be a verse that most of us are familiar with. The whole chapter of Romans, I hope you're familiar with. The whole chapter 12 of Romans, I hope you're familiar with, because there's a lot of meat in that chapter. But we're going to take just a little piece of it out and talk about it a little bit this morning. Let's go ahead and read Romans chapter 12. Let's read the first two verses. Paul says here, I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your body as a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. I hope that is the mission and the goal of each and every one of us, to prove what is that acceptable and perfect will of God. As Christians, that should be our goal, to be accepted by God. Unfortunately, in the society we live, we spend a lot of time trying to be accepted by men, and that's what we're going to talk about a little bit this morning. Do not be conformed to this world is the main point that I want to take out of verse 2 today. So what does that mean, to be conformed to the world? Is it acting in a worldly and sinful way? It can be, but not always. Not necessarily living in a sinful manner. It may not be that simple. We think about the word conform. It's a very simple word, and I think we all can understand it. But to change the shape of something so that it fits into its surroundings. When you think about pouring liquid into a container, that liquid will take whatever shape you pour it into. We as human beings tend to take the shape of our environment. Whoever we're around, those who we spend time with, we tend to take that shape, and we conform to those that are around us. We think about all the things that we can be involved in this life, and many of them are not sinful in and of themselves. Many of the things are good in and of themselves. But we surround ourselves daily with these things of the world, things of this life. And we become very busy. We're a very busy society. We fill our time with friends, with work, with relatives, with hobbies, with entertainment. And all of these things can be good. But as I said, we're a very busy people. We're always on the go. We tend to, if we find a gap in our schedule, we fill it with something. And most of us have a hard time just sitting and talking, like we talked a few weeks ago in our class, about just meditating about God and who He is and what He wants us to be. We try to fit one more thing in if we can, if there's a gap in our schedule. I would suggest to you that we can be so involved in so many things of this life that we begin to fit in with the world. We begin to be conformed to the world. Not necessarily in a sinful manner. Let's think about for a minute how much time that we actually spend trying to fit in to the world. For the most part, as humans, we like to fit in. We want to be liked. We like to be part of a group. We like to be accepted by those around us. That's very natural for us, whether it be our friends, our relatives, our co-workers. We don't want to be an outcast. Kind of the opposite of one who conforms. The outcast is one who is cast out because they didn't conform. Seems like a very easy concept, but none of us want to be the outcast. We don't want to be alone. We don't like to stand out from the crowd. We like to blend in, not draw attention to ourselves. And I thought about this some. There are some, seems to be typically in the younger generations, and when I was a younger generation, it was in my generation. So I'm not just picking on this younger generation. It's in all younger generations. There are some who will try to stand out on purpose. And when you think about why they're doing that, they'll dress a certain way or act a certain way to draw attention to themselves so they can be accepted by a certain group. They want to fit in with that certain group. So even in our attempts to be different, aren't we really trying to be accepted by someone? We as humans like to be accepted. We don't like to be outcast. And this seems to be the nature of man. So why would God create man with a nature to want to be accepted, and then through Paul tell us, don't be conformed to the world around you? We'll get back to that point here in a little bit. Let's get back to Paul's words here in Romans 12 and verse 2, where he says, do not be conformed to the world. We talked about some of the things that we can be involved in this life, and I won't go into a whole list of the things that we can do that are not sinful in and of themselves. I think we're all aware and involved in many of those things that we can be doing. We can get so caught up in doing all these things that we're conforming to the world around us and maybe don't even realize it. So there must be more to Paul's warning where he says, do not be conformed, than just being busy. I don't think that's all that Paul was talking about when he said, just, don't be so busy with things that you're conforming to the world. I think there's more to it than that. If you would, turn back with me to James chapter 1. James chapter 1 and verse 27. He says, pure and undefiled religion before God and the Father is this, to visit orphans and widows in their trouble, and to keep oneself unspotted from the world. To be pure and undefiled before God, we must keep ourselves unspotted from the world. This implies that there are things in this world that will cause spot, that will cause blemish. Things that will make us impure in God's eyes. Things that will make us unacceptable to God. Some would teach that once you're saved, you're always saved. There's nothing, once you've been saved, there's nothing you can do to hinder that. And that perhaps God's grace will cover all of those spots and blemishes. I would suggest to you what we find here in James tells us that it's our duty to keep ourselves unspotted and unblemished. Yes, we need God's grace because we're all going to make mistakes, but it's our duty to keep ourselves unspotted from the world. Paul knew that we are drawn to things of this world when he gave the warning in Romans. We have a similar warning in John, or from John. Let's go to 1 John chapter 2. 1 John chapter 2, let's begin in verse 15. Do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, is not of the Father, but is of the world. And the world is passing away, and the lust of it. But he who does the will of God abides forever. So as we think about not being conformed to the world, keeping ourselves pure and unspotted from the world, here from John, we find that things of this world are not of God. If we're going to be part of this world and truly conform to this world, we are not of God either. And sadly, the things of this world are going to go away. John warns us not to love the things of this world and the things that are in it. He warns us that there is a separation between the things of this world and the things of God. And if we're conformed to this world, there is a separation between us and God as well. Keep in mind there are things of this world that are not sinful in and of themselves, as we talked about earlier in the lesson. But we can be so busy that we forget to be conformed to God. Do we oftentimes try to have both? We want to live in this world and be conformed to this world, and then on Sunday and perhaps Wednesday, we come together and want to be connected with God. And we find ourselves trying to have both. Do we fill our life up every day with the things of this life and claim to be with God? What we see here in John is that doesn't happen. It doesn't work that way. In verse 17, let's reread that. And the world is passing away and the lust of it, but he who does the will of God abides forever. We're warned that the things that fill up our time when we're completely busy with things of this world. Those things are going to pass away. So in knowing this, that the world and the things in it shall pass away, why do we continue to try to be accepted by the world? Because we do. We all do. Let's go back to the book of John, chapter 15. John chapter 15, let's begin in verse 18. Jesus is talking here. He says, "If the world hates you, you know that it hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world would love its own. Yet because you are not of the world, but I chose you out of the world, therefore the world hates you. Remember the word that I said to you, a servant is not greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they will also persecute you. If they kept my word, they will keep yours also. But all these things they will do to you for my name's sake, because they do not know him who sent me. If I had not come and spoken to them, they would have no sin, but now that they have no excuse for their sin, he who hates me hates my Father also. And if I had not done among them the works which no one else did, they would have no sin. But now they have seen and have hated both me and my Father. But this happened that the word might be fulfilled, which is written in the law. They hated me without a cause." That should give us pause when we're trying to blend in, when we're trying to conform, when we're trying to be accepted. Those who hate the Lord, those of the world who hate the Lord, will also hate us if we are of the Lord. If our light is shining like it should be, we might find ourselves like the ones Jesus is talking to here, that the world hates us. And I think we can see that in society today when there are individuals that see people trying to stand for truth. They're hated. They're outcast. That goes against our nature to be accepted. As we think about those who are haters of God, turn with me back to Romans chapter 1. In Paul's letter to the Romans, he sheds some light on some of those of this world who hate God. And he puts together a list here. Romans chapter 1, let's begin in verse 28. "And even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a debased mind to do those things which are not fitting, being filled with all unrighteousness, sexual immorality, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, evil-mindedness. They are whisperers, backbiters, haters of God, violent, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents, undiscerning, untrustworthy, unloving, unforgiving, unmerciful, who knowing the righteous judgment of God, that those who practice such things are deserving of death, not only do the same, but also approve of those who practice them." So we see a list here of sinful men that are, no question, we can see a significant amount of these in our life today, in the world around us, that practice these things. Included in that is haters of God. And we just looked in John, Jesus talking about those who hated God will also hate you. Don't be surprised by that. So in this list that we see, some of these in this list and individuals that we see that practice these things, we may find ourselves trying to gain their approval when we live in the world, among those in the world. We try to gain their approval or their acceptance. As we note in verse 32, do we go so far to gain their acceptance that we approve the things that they do? We may not take part in the things that they do, but do we speak up against it? Do we find ourselves being willing to put ourselves in a position where we might be the outcast? We might be the one that's hated because we speak up and we let our light shine and we speak up against sin. We don't approve of them or what they do. Or do we conform because we don't want to be the outcast? We live in a time in the society that's very critical of anyone who does not conform. I think we've all seen that in different ways. If you do not conform, you are an outcast. You see that as I was growing up, the concept of canceling someone wasn't even a thing. But today, individuals who at least have any sort of fame, they try to cancel them if they don't like what they do. Well, the same type of thing can happen to us as Christians. We can be outcast by so-called friends, co-workers, even potentially family, if we rub them the wrong way and try to stand for truth. But we shouldn't be surprised. We saw that in John. Don't be surprised if they hate you, because they hated me first. That's what he said. I would suggest to you that if you feel comfortable in the world, among those of the world who are living in a worldly way, if you feel comfortable among them, perhaps you're not letting your light shine in a way that would cause them to hate you. Perhaps you're trying to be accepted by them, trying to conform to their ways. Maybe not practicing their sin, but being accepting of it. I'm not suggesting that we show hatred towards anyone who has sin in their life and lives in a way that they shouldn't be. I'm not suggesting that we show hatred at them, or that even that we hold them at arm's length to the point where we can't be the shining light to them. I don't suggest that at all. We need to make sure that they can learn from our example. But we can't do that by conforming. As we look at the example of Christ, he was, even in his day, he was with some very lowly, sinful people. He was exposed to them, he was around them, but he wasn't living like them. And that's the difference that Paul's talking about in Romans chapter 12 and verse 2. So how do we live in a world with sinful men? We're surrounded by sin daily. How do we live in that and not conform to the world? What's the answer? This brings us back to our earlier question, why would God make us with a nature to want to be accepted and then tell us don't conform to those who are around you? Let's go to Colossians chapter 3. Colossians chapter 3, we'll begin in verse 1. If then you were raised with Christ, seek those things which are above, where Christ is sitting at the right hand of God. Set your mind on things above, not on things of the earth. For you died, and your life is hidden with Christ in God. Set your mind on things above, not on things of this earth. We are to conform. Not to this world, but to God, to Christ, to the things that we see in His teaching and the examples in the New Testament. We have chosen to set aside our sinful life, our sinful ways when we've become a Christian. Set aside the ways of the world and focus on Him. Our mind should not be on the things of this earth. Back in Romans chapter 12, where we began, let's drop down and read verses 9 and 10. Romans 12, beginning in verse 9, says, "Let love be without hypocrisy. Abhor what is evil, cling to what is good. Be kindly affectionate to one another with brotherly love, in honor, giving preference to one another." There are so many things in this world that are evil. We're to abhor what is evil. We're to hate the things that are evil. Why would we want to surround ourselves with things that we hate? If we truly hate evil, if we truly hate sin, not the sinner, But if we truly hate sin, why would we want to surround ourselves with something that we hate? None of us try to surround ourselves with things that we hate. So I would suggest to you, if we're surrounding ourselves with things of the world, do we really hate it like we should? He says, cling to what is good. Are our fellow Christians good? Yeah, we all make mistakes, but for the most part, we're good. Why would we not surround ourselves with fellow Christians rather than things of the world? In verse 10, it says, giving preference to one another. Where do you prefer to spend your time? If you have the choice, do you choose to go spend time with the world, or do you choose to spend time with other Christians? When we think about our nature and wanting to conform, shouldn't we surround ourselves with people who we should want to conform to be like? You know, in Acts chapter 2, we see an example of the early church. We'll turn over there quickly. If I can get there quickly. Acts chapter 2, verses 44 and 45. It says, now all who believed were together and had all things in common, and sold their possessions and goods and divided them among all as anyone had need. I'm not suggesting that we all go out and sell everything we have and buy a piece of land and build a commune. That's not what I'm suggesting. But when we look at the example of the early church, they wanted to spend time together, and they did whatever it took to take care of each other. They preferred one another, like Paul talked about in Romans 12 and 10. Satan does his job very well. He helps us get busy and busier and busier with good things even. Many of the things that we're busy with in this life are good things, wholesome things that we can be involved in. But we can spend so much time doing those good things, we're too busy to spend time with our brother. We've got too much going on in our life to take the time to just go help a brother with something that they have a need of, or a sister that has a need, or to just spend time together. You know, being busy and involved in so many things is so much a part of our society, it would be very difficult to change. We would have to make a concerted effort to change that lifestyle, to change that habit of being busy. Being involved in so many activities, we might have to cut back on some activities. We might have to work a few less hours. Maybe some projects that we wanted to get done would have to go on the back burner so that we could go over and help a brother or sister with a project that was important to them. Just so that we could spend time with them and be influenced by them, be an influence to them. So that when we are conforming to something, it's something good and not things of this world. We could be uplifting, encouraging, helping each other, learning to love each other as God wants us to, as we've seen in the verses that we've read so far. I would ask you to look around the building, literally look around the building at the others sitting in here with you. Do you care if they make it to heaven? Does that matter to you? Do you know that they can help you get to heaven? They can be an encouragement, uplifting to you, helping you conform to what you should conform to and not the things of this life. Let's go back to 1 John once again. We'll go to 1 John chapter 3 this time. First John 3, let's begin in verse 10. In this, the children of God and the children of the devil are manifest. Whoever does not practice righteousness is not of God, nor is he who does not love his brother. For this is the message that you heard from the beginning, that you should love one another. Not as Cain, who was of the wicked one, and murdered his brother. And why did he murder him? Because his works were evil and his brother's righteous. Do not marvel, my brethren, if the world hates you. We know that we have passed from death to life because we love the brethren. He who does not love his brother abides in death. Whoever hates his brother is a murderer, and you know that no murderer has eternal life abiding in him. By this we know love, because he laid down his life for us, and we also ought to lay down our lives for the brethren. But whoever has this world's goods and sees his brother in need and shuts up his heart from him, how does the love of God abide in him? My little children, let us not love in word or in tongue, but in deed and in truth. Let's jump down to verse 23. And this is his commandment, that we should believe on the name of his Son, Jesus Christ, and love one another as he gave us commandment. Let's also jump down to 1 John 4. Read verses 20 and 21. If someone says, I love God, and hates his brother, he is a liar. For he does not love his brother whom he has seen. How can he love God who he has not seen? And this commandment we have from him, that he who loves God must love his brother also. As I ask you to look around the room at those sitting in here, do you love your brother enough to care whether he makes it to heaven? Do you love him enough that you want to spend time with him rather than those of the world? We're blessed to live in a country where we have religious freedoms. We can gather like we are here this morning, and we don't worry about the police coming and giving us a hard time. Unfortunately, I think sometimes that makes it easy for us to just blend into the world, because we can come here on Sunday and worship God as we see fit, and then tomorrow morning we can go right back out into the workplace and into the world, and if we choose to, live like the world. And nothing happens. Unfortunately, because of those freedoms, we don't have to stand firm. We're not forced to stand firm in the face of the laws of the land and in face of violent opposition to our beliefs. Keep in mind that might not always be the case. In some places in the world, it's not the case today. There are Christians who have to struggle to live the life of a Christian. We're very blessed. There's a growing trend in our society today to silence anyone who speaks of God or his laws, to put them down. So that could change to the point where we become punished for trying to stand for truth. More than just being ridiculed or canceled. We're actually put in jail for standing for truth. So my question for you this morning is, what will you do if that happens? Who will you turn to for help? Will you turn to the brethren in here, or will you go to a friend of the world when things get bad? Who will your children turn to when they have a need? Another brother? Or do they call a friend of the world when they need help? Have you taught them to cling to the brethren, or to blend into the world, to conform to the world, to be part of the world, except on Sunday? It's important that we make sure that we live our life each and every day loving our brother like the verses that we've looked at, and be very careful that we aren't so busy in this life that we inadvertently conform to those around us in the world and don't even realize that we're doing it. We make an effort to not be so busy living in this life that we take the time for our brethren. I would ask you this morning, as we bring our thoughts to a close, are you conformed to this world? Are you so comfortable living in this world that those who are living in sin around you just don't bother you? It doesn't offend you. I would suggest if you're not hated by the world, then maybe your light's not shining as bright as it should be. And all of us, I think, are guilty of being involved in that busy lifestyle. I've heard people say that once you retire, you're busier than you ever were. And it's just different busy. The schedules may be a little different, but we can get very busy in this world. Let's make sure that as Christians that we're loving each other and not loving this world and conforming to it. This morning, as we bring our thoughts to a close, if anyone needs to take the steps initially to become a Christian, we have opportunity for you to do so. If you need the prayers of the brethren, whatever your need might be this morning, make those known as we stand and sing.